Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're really pulling back the curtain on a moment in recent NBA history that was, frankly, pretty head-scratching for a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely raise some eyebrows.
We're focusing on the Denver Nuggets, a team that just came off a championship, suddenly making a major coaching change mid-season while still very much in contention.
Right in the thick of it.
Our guide for this specific deep dive, our core source material, is an article from Yardbarker Last Word on Sports, titled Coach Adelman More Than Earned His Promotion.
Okay.
And our goal is simple but ambitious. To take this article, dig into every key point it makes, understand the truly bizarre circumstances surrounding this change, the immense pressure David Adelman faced stepping into the head coach role under those conditions, and ultimately how this particular source argues he didn't just survive the situation, but that he absolutely earned his place at the helm despite all the chaos.
And it's vital to set the stage correctly here, as the source does. I mean, a coaching change is disruptive in any sport at any level. It just is. But when you're talking about a team just one season removed from winning the whole thing, and making that change this deep into the current season while still being considered a legitimate contender, it's highly unusual.
Extremely.
The article describes this timing as truly unprecedented circumstances. And that phrase, it really underscores the difficulty and the immediate questions it raised.
Yeah.
It wasn't a team floundering at the bottom. It was a team perceived to be underperforming relative to its talent level, maybe, but still very much in the mix. Handing the reins over in that precise moment is a massive challenge for anyone.
Absolutely. And the central argument the article builds towards, the narrative it seeks to establish, is that Adelman wasn't merely a temporary fix, right? Not just a convenient internal option or some placeholder until they could conduct a full search in the offseason.
No, not at all, according to this piece.
The source contends that he genuinely demonstrated the coaching chops, the strategic intelligence, and, frankly, the leadership required under what can only be described as extreme pressure.
He didn't just inherit a situation, he actively navigated it.
Exactly. And, according to the source, earned his spot. Okay, let's unpack this and see exactly how the article makes that case.
Let's do it.
So, the article starts by laying out the inciting event, the moment that triggered this whole story. The shocking decision by the Denver Nuggets to part ways with head coach Michael Malone.
Shocking is definitely the word the source uses.
Now, shocking is a strong word, but given Malone's tenure, nearly a decade, and the recent championship success, it certainly resonated that way across the league and with fans,
Oh, absolutely. This wasn't a separation from a coach who had failed miserably for years. It was a separation from one who had reached the absolute pinnacle with this very group of players just the season before.
Right, and the source immediately zeroes in on the timing, which it calls out as a critical factor. Malone was fired so late in the regular season.
Yeah, that's the kicker.
Yeah.
This isn't just late in the schedule. It's getting right up against the playoffs. Crunch time.
The article emphasizes that this timing created truly unprecedented circumstances in the history of the NBA.
And to understand why this is such a big deal, you have to think about the implications, right?
Yeah.
Teams that change coaches usually do so much earlier if they're underperforming.
Right, give the new guy some time.
Exactly. Give a new coach time to implement their system, build relationships, scout opponents properly. Or, if it's a contender making a change, it usually happens after a disappointing playoff exit in the offseason.
Makes sense.
Doing it now, with the playoff push already underway and opponents already scouting teams intensely for the postseason, it leaves almost no time for fundamental changes. Just none.
Wow.
It implies a level of urgency, maybe even, desperation, from the front office that forced their hand at an incredibly awkward moment.
Yeah, it really limits the new coach's ability to put their stamp on the team or even conduct extensive practices, doesn't it?
Completely. You're basically managing on the fly, game to game.
That paints a clear picture of the difficulty Adelman was immediately faced with. The article describes the environment he stepped into as chaotic, which, makes perfect sense.
Total chaos, yeah.
You have a team with massive expectations, coming off a title, sudden leadership change, right before the most important part of the season.
The pressure must have been immense.
And the source is explicit about the outlook this created, stating that the timing left little optimism that the Nuggets could make a deep playoff run or win it all, despite possessing arguably the best player in the world on their roster in Nikola Jokic.
Right. So the talent was absolutely there, no question. The championship pedigree was recent. But the sudden instability and the clock just ticking down to the playoffs, It dampened expectations significantly, according to the article.
Really lowered the ceiling, at least in perception.
And the source further underscores the magnitude of Adelman's challenge by offering a comparison point. It references Tomas Isolo's situation with Memphis,
Okay, I remember that.
describing him as a more accomplished head coach overseas who struggled to leave a mark after taking over in similarly unstable conditions.
Right.
Now, this comparison isn't meant to diminish Isolo, not at all. It's more to highlight just how inherently difficult it is for any coach, even one with a strong resume from elsewhere, to succeed when inheriting a team mid-crisis with no stability.
Sets a benchmark, kind of.
Exactly. It sets a benchmark for the level of difficulty Adelman was up against. It suggests that simply not failing spectacularly in such a situation is an accomplishment in itself, let alone thriving.
Yeah, just keeping the ship afloat would have been something.
For sure.
And if the on-court chaos and time constraints weren't enough pressure, the source brings up this fascinating and frankly pretty cynical angle about how Adelman's promotion could have been perceived externally.
Ah, the ownership angle.
Yeah. It directly links this potential perception to the Nuggets ownership group, the Karinkas, mentioning their reputation for cutting corners on off-court spending.
Okay, that reputation is well known in sports circles.
Right. So the article suggests that, given this context, Adelman could have been seen with a quite cynical viewpoint. That is, that he might have been viewed primarily as a budget-friendly placeholder.
Oof, that's tough.
The implication here is that hiring an internal assistant was seen by some as the cheaper, easier route compared to conducting an expensive search for a high-profile established head coach.
Someone maybe with a championship track record elsewhere.
Exactly. Someone who would likely command a much larger salary. So the idea was maybe they just promoted from within to save some money.
That initial cynical narrative, as described by the source, adds another layer of pressure on Adelman that goes way beyond just X's and O's.
Totally.
Not only did he have to stabilize a team in chaos late in the season, but he potentially had to battle a perception, maybe fueled by the ownership's reputation, that he wasn't the best person for the job, just the most convenient or, like you said, affordable.
That's a heavy burden.
It would put immense pressure on him to prove his worth immediately, not just to the team and fans, but to the broader basketball world, and perhaps even implicitly to his own front office, who might have faced criticism for the timing and the internal promotion. It makes his job title feel kind of conditional right from the start.
It's a tough spot to be in, for sure. You're stepping into this high-pressure role late in the game with the team's championship window wide open. And on top of all that, there's this whispered possibility that you're just the cheap option.
You have to fight against that narrative right away.
Absolutely. And the source is unambiguous in its central claim. Adelman has destroyed that potential narrative.
Okay, so how did he do it?
Right. The rest of the article is dedicated to explaining precisely how he managed to do that. This is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
What did he actually do to prove that he was more than just a placeholder?
Yeah, let's get into the specifics.
So, according to the source, Adelman's impact was felt pretty quickly, and it went beyond just maintaining stability. The article says he didn't just steady the team, he elevated it under intense pressure.
Elevated. That's a strong word.
It is. That word elevated is key. It suggests an improvement in performance or dynamic despite the challenging circumstances he inherited, not just treading water.
And the article touches on the value of a fresh voice in this context, which can be a real thing.
Definitely.
For a veteran locker room that may have grown weary after nearly a decade under Michael Malone, a new voice could be impactful.
After that long.
I mean, after many years under the same coach, players might benefit from a different communication style, a slightly altered approach, or simply hearing familiar concepts explained in a new way. The source suggests this subtle shift in communication and perspective provided by Adelman was a factor in re-energizing the team.
Especially a group that had been together for such a long time under the previous coach.
Exactly. It's not necessarily about drastic tactical changes initially, but sometimes just a change in the day-to-day dynamic can have an effect, a little reset.
And the source makes a crucial point about what Adelman didn't do, which I think is just as important. It notes that he didn't need to overhaul anything right away, particularly on offense.
Smart move, probably.
Well, the reason given is clear and undeniable. The Nuggets' offense still runs through Nikola Jokic, and that won't change as long as the Serbian superstar remains in Denver.
Can't argue with that. When you have a unique generational offensive hub like Jokic, your entire system revolves around his strengths as a scorer and passer. Just has to.
So Adelman wisely, according to the article, recognized that the core engine of the offense was working and didn't need a fundamental redesign.
Right. Trying to impose a completely new offensive philosophy on a team built around Jokic, especially mid-season with no practice time, that likely would have been totally counterproductive, disaster territory.
For sure. So his initial focus, as described by the source, wasn't on ripping up the successful offensive blueprint centered on Jokic.
So where was the impact felt then, initially?
Well, the article suggests his early impact was felt more in other areas. When discussing the early defensive improvement the team showed, the source makes a very specific attribution.
Okay, defense. Let's hear it.
It states this improvement stemmed more from the veteran core flipping the switch into playoff mode than from any major schematic shift.
Ah, okay. Flipping the switch. That's a classic sports term.
Right. This is an important distinction the source makes. Flipping the switch refers to experienced teams or players who just naturally ramp up their intensity, their focus, their effort significantly as the regular season ends and the high-stakes playoffs begin.
I know what time it is.
Exactly. So the source is arguing that the initial defensive uptick was primarily a result of the players themselves elevating their game, bringing a higher level of defensive urgency that comes with the postseason.
Rather than Adelman coming in and immediately introducing some brand new, complex defensive system overnight.
Precisely. It separates player intensity from coaching scheme, at least at the start.
That nuance is really insightful, actually. It acknowledges Adelman was at the helm, sure, but credits the player's inherent playoff readiness as the main driver of that initial defensive lift.
And the article even provides a specific detail that reinforces this timeline. It mentions that even in the final stretch of the regular season, Jokic in particular showed a noticeable uptick in defensive intensity even before the Malone firing.
Oh, interesting. So it was already starting to bubble up.
That's what the source suggests. This detail is surprising and adds another layer to the picture. It suggests that some of this defensive shift was already starting to happen organically within the team, even under the previous coach as the playoffs loomed.
So Adelman stepped in just as that corner was maybe being turned anyway.
And his role was perhaps more about sustaining and focusing that energy rather than creating it from scratch initially.
It certainly provides a more complete context. While Adelman was the coach when the defensive improvement became more apparent, the source suggests the seeds were already being planted by the veteran players themselves, anticipating the postseason intensity.
Yeah.
It implies his early success was partly about riding that wave of player-driven motivation while subtly guiding it, maybe tweaking things around the edges.
Thinking about that, the whole idea of a veteran team flipping the switch versus coaching changes driving improvement, it really makes you consider how credit is assigned in sports, doesn't it?
It does. It's rarely just one thing.
How much does leadership change truly cause improvement versus just coinciding with the natural cycle of a season or the inherent motivation of experienced players? The source here gives us a specific example where, at least initially, they argued the player's own readiness was the dominant factor in one key area, defense, even with Adelman taking over.
That's a good point. It's often a mix of both.
Now, the narrative shifts to the actual playoffs. The source takes us through the first round against the Los Angeles Clippers, which it describes as a high-level battle between two great teams.
Yeah, that was a tough draw right out of the gate. No warm-up series there.
Not at all. And the article evaluates Adelman's performance during this intense series. It notes that he managed the moment admirably.
Okay, admirably. What does that mean in practice?
Well, it included specific coaching actions, like making timely adjustments and smart rotation calls. So managing the moment in a playoff series means remaining calm under pressure, right?
Definitely. Staying composed.
Making strategic decisions that react to what the opponent is doing, and optimizing player usage in the rotation based on performance and matchups. The source suggests Adelman was successful in these fundamental coaching tasks throughout a very competitive series.
So he held his own, basically. Didn't look overwhelmed.
Exactly. But here's where the source introduces a crucial piece of analysis that adds depth and prevents this from just being a simple Adelman did great story.
Ah, there's always a but, isn't there?
Always. It explicitly states that despite his solid performance in this series, it wasn't a series that cemented his case as a long-term head coach.
Okay, that seems like a bit of a paradox. He managed admirably, made smart calls, but it wasn't enough to solidify his future. Why does the article make that distinction? What was missing?
Well, the source's reasoning is rooted in the strategic battle with the coach on the other sideline. According to the article, if anything, Tyronn Lue had the bigger tactical impact in that series.
Ty Lue. Okay, that makes sense. He's known for his playoff adjustments.
Right. And this is a critical point the source makes. Evaluations aren't just absolute. They are relative to the direct opponent, especially in a coaching duel.
It's head-to-head.
The source provides specific examples of Lou's strategic successes. It mentions Lou's small ball lineups gave Jokic real problems at times.
Yeah, I remember that being a factor. Trying to pull Jokic away from the basket.
Exactly. This highlights how Lou identified a specific vulnerability in the Nuggets' defense or in how they matched up against smaller, quicker groups and exploited it effectively.
The article also points to Lou's key decisions, right? Like inserting Nicholas Batum.
Yes, exactly. Like inserting Nicholas Batum in Game 6 in the second half into the starting lineup, which the source says played a pivotal role in making this a hard-fought 7-game series.
Okay, that's a very specific, detailed example of a mid-game, high-leverage adjustment by Lou, and the source credits that move with having a significant impact on the series outcome, helping the Clippers push it to the absolute limit.
Right. So these specific tactical moves by Lou, described in the article, are presented as having a greater visible impact on the series than Adelman's own coaching, even though Adelman was also coaching well. Lou's fingerprints were just maybe a bit more obvious on the outcome.
So the source is arguing that while Adelman was competent and capable in his first playoff test, Lou arguably had a more significant strategic imprint on the series itself.
Yeah, that seems to be the take. But, importantly, the article doesn't leave it there. It balances this by concluding that Adelman's overall performance in the series was still positive,
Okay.
stating he didn't look completely outmatched and proved he could hang with a championship-winning coach on the other sideline. He wasn't outclassed, just perhaps out-impacted by a veteran strategist in that particular matchup.
It's a nuanced view, then. It acknowledges Adelman's capability under pressure, while also giving due credit to the impactful coaching of the opponent, which honestly is a realistic way to evaluate coaching performance in a head-to-head playoff context.
Yeah, it's not always black and white.
It suggests Adelman passed the test of competence, absolutely, but perhaps didn't dominate the strategic chess match in a way that would definitively prove he was the long-term answer solely based on that one series against a coach like Lou.
That point from the source makes you think about coaching duels in the playoffs, doesn't it? How much does the performance of the opposing coach influence how we perceive and evaluate our own team's coach?
Massively. It's inescapable.
The article shows us it's not just about one side. It's a strategic battle where sometimes the other guy's moves are just a little sharper or have a bigger effect, even if your coach is doing a perfectly good job.
Right. Sometimes the other coach just finds the right counterpunch.
But the real turning point in the source's narrative, the section that makes the strongest case for Adelman earning the job, comes in the second round against the Oklahoma City Thunder.
The OKC series. Okay.
The article is effusive here, calling this Adelman's defining performance, the one that truly showcased his coaching acumen. It's even labeled his magnum opus within this short tenure.
Magnum opus. Wow. That's high praise. So what happened?
Well, this series started rough for Denver, according to the source. OKC seemed to score at will in games 1 and 2. Their offense was potent, dynamic, and the Nuggets were struggling to contain it with their existing defensive schemes.
Yeah, OKC was flying high at that point.
Totally. The source emphasizes the urgency Adelman faced. He had no choice but to adjust quickly. Continuing with the same approach clearly wasn't working. Something fundamental had to change, and fast.
Okay, so adjustment time. What did he do?
And this is where Adelman made what the article describes as a bold and highly effective tactical shift. He decided to lean into a zone defense that the Nuggets deployed for most of the remaining series.
A zone. Interesting. Against a team like OKC.
Yeah, and this zone defense is highlighted as a strategic centerpiece of Adelman's success, according to the source. The article explains why it was so significant. It wasn't a minor tweak. It marked a significant departure from the aggressive pick-and-roll coverage that Michael Malone had embedded into this team for many years.
Okay, wait. Malone's defensive system, built over almost a decade, was the team's default, right? Their identity on that end of the floor. Moving away from that is a major strategic pivot.
Huge. And the source provides crucial context here to emphasize the boldness and the risk involved. It notes that any previous attempted departure from the tried and true system ended in a complete disaster, until now at least.
Whoa. So they tried moving away from Malone's system before Adelman, and it failed. Badly.
That's what the article says, complete disaster. This detail is powerful. It tells us that experimenting with different defensive schemes before Adelman took over had not worked for this team. Malone's pick-and-roll coverage was the proven, albeit sometimes criticized, approach.
So Adelman was choosing to implement a strategy that had a history of not working for this specific group of players, adding layers of risk to an already incredibly high-pressure situation. That takes guts.
Right, and the article is very honest about how this bold move looked at first. It stresses that the zone defense did not look like it at first, not even close.
Okay, so it wasn't an instant success.
Far from it. Adelman introduced it in Game 1, but the source describes it as a total mess, riddled with miscommunications and defensive breakdowns. Players seemed unsure of where to be, rotations were slow, late, and OKC was just exploiting the gaps. The article even notes that Denver needed a miraculous comeback just to steal Game 1.
So they won despite the zone's poor initial execution, not because of it.
That's the implication. And Game 2 was even worse, a complete dismantling of the Nuggets by OKC, reinforcing just how ineffective the zone seemed in its infancy. It looked bad.
Okay, so this is the moment the source pinpoints as the defining characteristic of Adelman's coaching strength,
Yeah.
right? Because the zone looked terrible, the series looked like it might be over quickly.
Exactly. And the easy, safe option would have been to revert to the familiar pick-and-roll coverage, even if it wasn't working perfectly against OKC either.
The article writer even admits it, says, lesser basketball minds, this writer included, would have scraped the zone and gone back to the known commodity.
The high pick-and-roll coverage. But Adelman didn't. He stuck with it.
That requires immense conviction in his strategic plan, especially when faced with immediate glaring failure in the playoffs.
Wow. And the source emphasizes it wasn't just stubbornness. It highlights that he also made the right tweaks and trusted his players to figure it out.
Ah, okay. So it's a combination of strategic intelligence, identifying and correcting flaws within the zone scheme, and leadership maintaining faith in his players' ability to learn and execute a complex new system under intense playoff pressure.
Exactly. It wasn't just blind adherence. It was a commitment coupled with necessary adjustments and player trust, believing they could get it right.
And did they? Did it start working?
Yes. The payoff, according to the article, was significant and timely. By Game 4, the zone started clicking, and it kept working until Game 7.
Okay, so they figured it out.
They did. The team started understanding the reads, covering for each other, disrupting OKC's flow effectively. It wasn't perfect, but it was working well enough.
And the source is clear about the impact this strategic perseverance had.
Very clear. That adjustment gave Denver a real chance to win the series. A fundamental shift in defensive philosophy, sticking with it through those ugly early struggles, and successfully implementing it mid-series fundamentally changed the dynamics of the matchup.
It turned what looked like a potential sweep into a competitive 7-game battle.
Precisely. This willingness to pivot strategically under pressure, coupled with the conviction to see it through, is presented by the source as the strongest evidence of Adelman's coaching skill and why he ultimately earned the job.
That whole sequence, as described in the source, it really is a powerful lesson in strategic conviction and perseverance, isn't it?
Absolutely. Sticking with a new, messy strategy when the easy, familiar thing is to go back to what you know, even when it looked like a total mess at first.
How do you evaluate a decision like that in the moment when it seems to be actively costing you? The source gives Adelman major credit for having the foresight and courage to see it through and make it work when it mattered most. That's impressive coaching.
Now, while the zone adjustment against the Thunder is highlighted as Adelman's strategic masterpiece, the source is balanced in its assessment. It's clear that despite this tactical success, the Nuggets still bowed out in the second round.
Right, they didn't win the series ultimately.
So it wasn't a perfect run, and the article points to specific areas where the team and perhaps Adelman's coaching of the offense fell short.
Okay, so what were the areas for improvement? The source details the offensive struggles the team experienced, particularly concerning their superstar, Nikola Jokic, during this playoff stretch.
Yeah, what happened with Jokic?
It notes that for the first time in years, Jokic looked mortal, struggling through one of his least efficient stretches, especially in the series against the Thunder.
Wow, mortal. That's not something you usually associate with Jokic's offense.
Not at all. Now, while the source is fair and attributes some of this struggle to the elite defensive work of Ivica Zubac and Isaiah Hartenstein, acknowledging the opposing centers played outstanding defense on him.
Which they did, Zubac, especially in the Clips series. Hartenstein at times, too.
Right. But the source also critiques aspects of the Nuggets' offensive approach under Adelman during that stretch.
Okay, like what specifically?
A specific critique from the source regarding the offense is that Denver didn't do enough to ease the burden on their superstar.
Hmm. Make things easier for Jokic.
Yeah. The article states there was a noticeable lack of set plays designed to give the Serbian easy looks. And it provides a very specific example to illustrate this point.
What was the example?
Things like baseline guard screens, which under Michael Malone were one of the most effective plays to get Jokic going, were completely missing.
Oh, that's interesting. A specific type of play that used to work, just gone. That's a detailed tactical observation suggesting Adelman's offensive sets weren't as effective at creating those easier scoring opportunities for Jokic compared to maybe the previous coaching staff's approach.
That's the critique. The source also flags another coaching decision related to Jokic's usage. Adelman's choice to leave the Joker in for extended stretches without any rest. The minutes debate. Always tough with superstars. Ways. The article acknowledges the understandable fear of the dreaded non-Jokic minutes, recognizing that the team's offense often just collapses when Jokic is on the bench. It's a real phenomenon.
We've all seen it.
But it argues that even he has his limits, and fatigue clearly played a role in tough losses. The source specifically cites Game 4 against the Clippers and Game 5 against the Thunder as instances where Jokic's heavy minutes and visible fatigue seemed to contribute significantly to the team's loss in crucial moments.
So pushing him too hard, basically.
That's the suggestion. It's a difficult dilemma for any coach of a superstar with limited bench support. But the source suggests Adelman perhaps pushed the limits of Jokic's endurance a bit too far in those key spots.
Okay, so those are specific tactical critiques raised by the source. Offensive sets, minutes management. However, and this is a crucial pivot in the article's overall argument, the source contends that these offensive struggles and the ultimate playoff exit were less about coaching flaws. Less about coaching.
Than they were about other, more limiting factors.
Okay, so what factors were more significant then, according to the source?
Exactly. The article points to what it sees as the primary constraints Adelman was operating under. Roster limitations and lingering injuries.
Health and depth. The usual suspects.
Pretty much, it details the specific personnel issues. Key players like Michael Porter Jr. and Jamal Murray battled through physical and health setbacks respectively, leading to inconsistent play.
Yeah, MPJ clearly wasn't himself, and Murray was visibly struggling through injuries throughout the playoffs. That was obvious watching the games.
Right. The source also states that the bench failed to provide meaningful support throughout the postseason, just couldn't rely on them consistently. That lack of reliable depth and the health issues plaguing key starters severely limited Adelman's rotation options, right? It forced him to lean even more heavily on Jokic, potentially contributing to those fatigue issues.
Exactly. And it reduced the overall talent and consistency on the court. These external factors, according to the source, were more significant impediments to success than Adelman's specific coaching decisions on offense or minutes.
It's a perspective that broadens the view beyond just blaming the person in charge, which is often the easy thing to do.
For sure. When a team falls short, it's easy to point to coaching, but the source here argues that in the Nuggets case, the deck was kind of stacked against Adelman by factors outside his direct control, the health of star players and the capability of the supporting cast.
How much do those elements, player availability and roster depth, truly determine a coach's ceiling, regardless of their strategic acumen? The source suggests they were the overriding factors here and why they ultimately lost.
It's a compelling argument. The article then brings the narrative full circle by drawing a really insightful parallel between David Adelman and his predecessor, Michael Malone.
Okay, comparing Adelman to Malone. How so?
It notes that Adelman's commitment to sticking with the zone defense against OKC, even when it looked disastrous early on,
Yeah, that bold move we talked about.
drew some clear parallels to Malone's past insistence on sticking with the high pick-and-roll coverage due to Jokic's defensive limitations, even when early results were underwhelming.
Okay, so the source sees a shared trait. This strategic conviction, maybe even stubbornness, and a willingness to ride out early struggles with a chosen defensive philosophy centered around Jokic's unique profile. Both coaches did that at different times.
Exactly. But what's interesting is how the source contrasts the reaction to these similar strategic commitments.
Oh, how is the reaction different?
It states Adelman didn't face nearly the same level of criticism during the course of one series that Malone once did for sticking with his preferred coverage when it struggled.
Really? Malone got more heat for it back in the day.
Apparently so, according to this source. The article provides specific context for Malone's situation, mentioning especially back in 2018 when many, myself included, were calling for a coaching change after the team missed the playoffs.
Wow, okay. So that period for Malone was marked by significant external pressure and doubt about his defensive philosophy and overall fit. Adelman, facing early struggles with his zone, didn't seem to draw that same level of intense fire, at least according to the source's perception.
Interesting.
It is interesting, but the core similarity that the source emphasizes is the outcome of that strategic perseverance. It states, and yet, much like Malone back then, Adelman's vision paid off.
Paid off how?
Well, both coaches, despite initial difficulties and potential external criticism for their chosen defensive approach centered on Jokic, ultimately saw their strategy yield positive results. It helped the team succeed in the long run, in Malone's case, eventually building towards a championship, or in Adelman's case, make a series incredibly competitive against a top opponent when they were shorthanded. Right. And the source powerfully reinforces why Adelman's strategic gamble and perseverance with his zone is so impressive, especially in the context of this comparison and who they were playing.
How does it reinforce that?
It notes that his willingness to stick with the zone almost propelled a flawed, injury-hampered Nuggets team past a Thunder squad that has since looked like a juggernaut throughout the rest of the playoffs.
Describing the Thunder as a juggernaut post-series.
Yeah.
That's a crucial piece of retrospective context provided by the source.
It absolutely is. It implies OKC proved themselves to be one of the absolute best teams in the league after defeating Denver. So the fact that Adelman's team, operating under significant health and roster limitations, pushed such a dominant opponent to 7 games, largely thanks to that strategic defensive shift.
Makes his coaching performance in that series all the more remarkable, as the source argues. It reframes the loss almost.
Exactly. That context facing a team that proved to be a juggernaut, doing it with a hampered roster, and still making it a near thing, truly elevates the source's assessment. It concludes this section by stating, quite plainly, that context makes Denver's performance and Adelman's coaching all the more impressive.
Yeah, that adds a lot of weight to his performance.
This comparison offers a valuable lens for evaluating coaching over time, I think. It highlights that sometimes the most impactful decisions involve sticking to your strategic beliefs through difficult patches, and that the success of that perseverance can look different depending on the circumstances and the strength of the opponent you're facing.
Adelman, like Malone before him in a different context, found success by trusting his plan, even when it was unpopular or initially looked like it wasn't working.
A testament to coaching conviction, maybe.
So, pulling this deep dive into the source material together, the article paints a clear picture of David Adelman stepping into a role under incredibly difficult, unexpected, and frankly unprecedented circumstances.
Absolutely. He took over a championship contender late in the season, inheriting chaos and facing a potential cynical narrative that he was merely a placeholder, the budget option.
But, according to the source, he didn't just ride out the storm, he elevated the team. He demonstrated genuine tactical skill, most notably with that bold and ultimately successful zone defense against a high-powered Thunder offense.
And crucially, the source argues he did this despite facing significant limitations from player injuries and roster construction issues, factors it views as more significant than any coaching shortcomings he might have had in that short stint.
Right, which leads to the article's ultimate conclusion, which is pretty definitive. Through his performance under pressure and key strategic adjustments, David Adelman has earned the right to lead this team going forward.
The source sees his brief tenure as basically proving his capability for the job on a permanent basis.
Right.
He passed the audition, essentially.
Yeah, passed with flying colors, according to this perspective. And looking ahead, the source expresses optimism for the future under his leadership.
What does it say about the future?
It states that, with a full offseason and training camp ahead of him as the official head coach, it will be exciting to see how far he can take this group. The article implies that with the opportunity to build the team dynamics and strategy from the ground up, without the crazy constraints of a mid-season takeover.
Adelman has the potential to achieve even greater things, put his own real stamp on the team.
Exactly. It's been a fascinating exploration of a unique moment in NBA coaching transitions, guided entirely by this specific source material from Yardbarker Last Word on Sports. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Always interesting to unpack these situations. And here's something for you to really think about, pulling directly from the points the article made. Given that the source highlighted specific offensive issues, like the lack of set plays for Jokic to get easy looks, and the bench's consistent struggles.
Yeah, those limitations were clear.
And I also emphasize the potential with a full offseason now under Adelman's complete control. What concrete, specific areas do you think Adelman and the team must prioritize fixing or developing with this full runway? How might having a full training camp and the chance to truly implement his vision change the team's offensive identity or defensive flexibility compared to the reactive situation he navigated this past season? Something for you to mull over as you consider the future for this team.